Hello, my name is George Upton, and I'm going to be talking about my final project, which is called Bump Mapping through WebGL. So my first influential research paper was a study on visual perception of 3D textures. This paper discusses and analyzes the various ways video games and their engine created 3D textures. This was a really good help because of the way that it took the approach was from students, and so with that being in mind, I looked at how certain textures should be able to be bump mapped, and that there were some that shouldn't be bump mapped. So this was a really good stepping stone for me to at least find some examples that worked really well with bump mapping. The second influential research paper was least assorted bump mapping onto surface patches. What this paper talked about was the problem on how bump mapping in certain cases can cause some distortion on the textures they are applied on. They want to fix this problem by approaching it in two steps. So the steps that they kind of go over is the ways that I was able to implement bump mapping into my project. And that was basically kind of dividing it into three different images. So the first one would be the image itself, and then there would be a bump map of that image, and then a displacement image, which would be the third one. And so all the images that I will show later actually have three images that are laid on top of each other. And so the way that they went about it in this paper, I was able to implement a sort of similar way, and I think this was a really good, I guess, way to go about bump mapping. Then my third one was computer graphics for water modeling and rendering. So this was basically a survey of what people thought would make realistic water. So this one was a little bit dated, it was 1980s, but I think it really kind of helped shape what I could do with the water example that I proposed in my proposition for the project. And instead of doing like water droplets, I decided to do an ocean, which I will show later. But I think me coming to that conclusion was really the help of this paper. So yeah. And so a summary of what my project is basically just a showcase of bump mapping on 2D textures in order for them to become 3D. So what the user can do, they can move the object around, there's going to be a lighting on it, and so you can just move around with the camera, zoom in, zoom out, and just kind of get a better look at the depth that I've created with these 2D textures. And these examples include a brick wall, a cube with depth, basically it's a cube with little shapes on it just so you can see the depth on it. Ocean with ripples, and paper that looks crumbled up to create depth. And so I will be showing you the live demonstration of that. So for the cube bump map, you have something that looks like this. Not the best one that came out, but it was still good nonetheless. Then we have the paper bump map, which we can see has created some depth with the crumbled up paper. The next one we have is the wall. This is the brick wall. As you can see, it looks very, very 3D. I think this one's probably one of the best that came up with in my examples. Looks very 3D, really realistic. And then we have the water. This is the ocean one. So I think this one was really good. I think probably second best. Really good depth in it, and even from above, this looks really, really nice. And so for the lessons that I've learned, so looking back at this project, I would state that I've learned that there are some examples that you should do bump mapping and some that shouldn't. Probably look at other avenues if you wanted to create depth with it, or maybe just even make that 3D within itself. I know there are examples that I've shown that actually have worked, but I was not able to implement them correctly. So I guess it just kind of all comes down to what you're able to do with the examples, and then maybe just showing more than just 2D textures. Now that I have more experience, I would probably like to implement this into a 3D landscape, which is what I'll be going into done differently. So one thing I would like to do differently is compare the bump map with 2D textures and 3D texture. The reason why is to show the difference. If the visual is close enough, you can use 2D bump map 2D textures and 3D environments and save processing power, which would in return allow someone to make a more vast and detailed landscape. So It would be a research that has to do with, here's a 2D texture, here's a 3D texture. Compare them between the two. The 2D texture would have bump mapping, while the 3D texture just has, it's just the 3D texture object. And you would just compare them, and that would lead to further, I guess, further projects, but at least just to show the difference between here's a bump map and here's a 3D, and can you, like, if the difference is good enough for them to be bump maps, or if they should be 3D, a 3D object. And so yeah, that concludes my project. Thank you for listening.